Business Essentials Podcast. Unlock your career.
Learn to speak business English like a pro.
You're standing at a networking event. Your heart is pounding. You see someone across the room you really want to talk to. And suddenly, your mind goes completely blank. If that sounds familiar, you are absolutely not alone. In fact, most professionals feel nervous about this. Studies show that around 70% of people feel real anxiety before networking events, mainly because they are afraid of not knowing what to say. And that is exactly what we are going to fix today. Welcome to today's episode, 5 Icebreakers for Networking Events. Never run out of things to say. I'm Marcus, and with me is Sarah. And quick heads up, if you're working on your business English at B2 to C1 level, this episode is packed with phrases you can steal and use immediately in real conversations. Sarah, let's jump straight in. Why is starting a simple conversation at a networking event such a big problem for so many people?
What I see again and again is that people are trying to perform instead of just connecting. They walk into the room thinking, I need the perfect line, I need to sound impressive, and that pressure completely shuts them down. The interesting thing is, research shows people consistently overestimate how awkward conversations will be and underestimate how good they will feel afterwards. In one study, people expected conversations with strangers to be really uncomfortable, but after talking, they reported feeling much happier and more connected than they predicted. So the problem is not the conversation itself. It is the story your brain tells you before it even starts.
So the brain is kind of lying to us before we say hello.
Exactly. Your brain is running a worst-case scenario forecast. It tells you, you'll be boring, they'll reject you, you'll run out of things to say. But the data shows the opposite. Once people actually start talking, they usually enjoy it and they build real connections, especially at professional events where almost everyone is there for the same reason.
And today, we want to help listeners change that story. Before we get into the icebreakers, can you walk us through what's actually happening in the brain when someone freezes at a networking event?
Sure, let's keep it simple. When you walk into a room full of strangers, your amygdala, that's basically your brain's alarm system, thinks you might be in danger. It can't really see the difference between I might be judged and I might be attacked. So it triggers a threat response. Faster heartbeat, sweaty hands, busy thoughts. At the same time, your attention moves inward. Instead of noticing the people around you, you're noticing your own heartbeat, your own doubts. Psychologists call this self-focus. You start thinking, do I sound stupid? Am I talking too much? Am I not talking enough? And when you're stuck in that internal loop, it's really hard to come up with a natural conversation starter.
So basically, your brain goes into survival mode, even though you're just holding a drink next to the snack table.
Exactly. And here's the key shift. You want to move from impression management to genuine curiosity. Instead of thinking, how do I impress this person? You ask, what can I learn about this person? The moment you do that, your attention goes outward, your body relaxes, and starting a conversation becomes much easier.
I like that, from impressing to being curious. And for our business English listeners, impression management basically means trying very hard to control how other people see you, right?
Yes, exactly. It's that feeling of performing all the time. In business English, a useful phrase here is focus on building a real connection. In a meeting, you might say, let's focus less on the perfect pitch and more on building a real connection with people.
Okay, that makes sense. Before we move into the specific icebreakers, what are some of the most common mistakes people make at networking events? What really kills the conversation before it even starts?
There are a few classic ones. Mistake number 1 is starting with generic small talk that feels empty. You know the line, so, nice weather we're having. It's safe, but it doesn't go anywhere. Most people can answer it in one word, and it doesn't show any real interest in the other person. Mistake number 2 is launching into your elevator pitch too fast. Someone says, hi, and 30 seconds later, you're giving them your full career story and your product details. That feels like a mini presentation, not a conversation. People remember how you made them feel, not how impressive your resume sounded. And mistake number 3 is waiting for the perfect line. You stand in the corner rehearsing sentences in your head until half the event is over. Perfectionism becomes paralysis.
Let's slow down on those because they are so common. Can you give me a quick scenario for getting it wrong? Like a picture of what this looks like in real life?
Sure. Imagine you're at a conference. You see someone standing alone near the coffee station. You walk over and say, So, the coffee is good. They laugh politely and say, Yeah, it's not bad. Then you both stare at your cups. There's no clear next question, so after 3 seconds of silence, you panic and say, Well, I'll let you get back to it. And you walk away. What actually happened there is that you went for a low-value topic, something nobody really cares about, and you didn't follow up with a more meaningful question. The silence felt huge to you because you were anxious, so you escaped instead of taking one more step.
And that actually makes you feel even more awkward afterwards, right? You go home thinking, I can't network.
Exactly. It reinforces the story that you're bad at this, even though the only problem was the opener and the follow-up.
So, what should that person have done instead in the same coffee station situation?
In the same situation, you could start with a simple, context-based question that shows real curiosity. For example, Hey, is this your first time at this event? What brought you here? That's our first icebreaker, by the way. The first time here opener? That question works because everyone can answer it, and it invites a story. If they say, Yeah, it's my first time. I work in marketing. You can follow up with, Oh, nice. What kind of projects are you working on at the moment? Now you're talking about something that matters to them.
I noticed you used the phrase, what brought you here? For our listeners, that's a really useful business English question. It sounds natural and polite, and you can use it in conferences, training sessions, even in a new office.
Exactly. It's a flexible phrase. You can say, What brought you to this event? Or, What brought you to this company? It signals that you're interested in their motivation, not just their job title.
Great. Let's drill down into the 5 icebreakers you recommend. And by the way, that phrase, drill down into, is such a classic business English expression. How would you explain it quickly?
To drill down into something means to look at it in detail, to go deeper into the information. For example, in a meeting you might say, Let's drill down into the numbers from last quarter. It's more specific and more professional than just saying, look at or go deeper.
So take us through the first icebreaker properly.
Icebreaker number 1 is the first time here opener. The basic version is this your first time at this event? What brought you here? To use it, you make eye contact, give a relaxed smile, and ask it with real curiosity. Then you actually listen to the answer instead of planning your next line. After they answer, you can follow up with something like, What's been the highlight for you so far? Or, How did you hear about this event? That keeps the conversation moving.
So this is a good option when you're both clearly participants, like waiting for a talk to start or standing in line for registration.
Exactly. It acknowledges the situation you are both in, which lowers anxiety. You're basically saying, We're in this together. And because you start by asking about them, you immediately show interest.
Okay, that's number 1. What about number 2?
Icebreaker number 2 is the genuine compliment opener. This one is powerful, but only if it's honest. You might say, I really enjoyed that presentation you gave. What was the most surprising part of your research? Or, I liked your comment in the panel. How did you get into that area? The structure is simple. Observe something specific, give a short compliment, then ask a question about it. That takes you directly into a meaningful topic, and it makes the other person feel seen and valued.
And this is where many learners worry about sounding fake. How can they keep it professional and authentic?
The key is to focus on something concrete. Instead of, You're amazing, say, I liked how you explained the challenge with remote teams so clearly. In business English, you can use phrases like, I really appreciated, or I found it interesting that. Those sound professional and sincere.
Nice. Let's move to number 3. I think this one is about finding common ground, right?
Exactly. Icebreaker number 3 is the find common ground opener. You start with a question about their interests in the industry, then you share your own in a short, non-salesy way. For example, what's your biggest interest right now in this industry? I'm particularly fascinated by how AI is changing customer service. Another fun version is to offer 2 options, like, are you more of a structured plan person or a spontaneous ideas person at work? That makes it lighter but still professional. Once you discover a shared interest, you can build on that common ground and go deeper.
For our listeners, common ground means shared interests, experiences, or opinions you both have. It's a great phrase for meetings, too. You can say, let's find common ground before we negotiate.
Exactly. And it's a nice, soft skills phrase because it focuses on collaboration, not conflict.
Okay, we have 3 icebreakers. Number 4 is something about asking for advice, right?
Yes. Icebreaker number 4 is the ask for their advice opener. This one works especially well with more senior people or experts at the event. You might say, I'm curious about your perspective. From your experience, what's the best way to approach networking at events like this? Or a simpler version, you seem to know this space well. What's one thing you'd advise someone who's new to this industry? Most people enjoy being asked for their opinion. It makes them feel respected and recognized, and it immediately positions them as the expert.
You used another useful phrase there. I'm curious about your perspective. That sounds very professional.
Yes, it's a very polite way to invite someone's opinion. In emails or meetings, you can say, I'd love to hear your perspective on this project, instead of just, what do you think? It sounds more respectful.
Great. Let's go to the 5th icebreaker, the one that rescues us from the classic weather conversation.
Right. Icebreaker number 5 is the shift from weather to substance opener. You can even use a little humor. For example, so the weather's nice, right? But actually, I'm curious, what's something in our industry that really interests you at the moment? Or a slightly more direct version, I know we're supposed to do small talk, but I'm much more interested in what you actually do. What's your story? Here, you openly admit that small talk is a bit awkward and then pivot to a real topic. That honesty relaxes people.
Let's pause on that phrasal verb, shift from to or pivot to. For our learners, that basically means you change from one topic to another, right?
Exactly. To shift from X to Y is to move your focus. In a meeting, you might say, let's shift from the technical details to the timeline. And to pivot to is similar but a bit trendier, often used in business when a company changes strategy. We decided to pivot to a subscription model.
So we've got 5 strong icebreakers, but many listeners might still think, okay, I know the phrases, but in the moment I panic and forget everything. Can you walk us through a real-life example, step by step?
Sure. Imagine you arrive at a networking breakfast. You don't know anyone. You get a coffee and see 2 people talking and one person standing alone at a high table. You decide to approach the person who is alone. That's usually easier. You walk up, smile, and say, hey, is this your first time at this event? What brought you here? They answer, actually, I've come a few times. I work in HR and I'm looking for new HR tech solutions. You follow up with, interesting. What kind of tools are you looking at right now? They start telling you about a platform they're testing. You listen, ask 1 or 2 follow-up questions, and then you might say, I'm mainly focused on learning how AI can support managers. What's your view on that? 10 minutes later, you've had a real conversation. You've exchanged LinkedIn details, and you feel much more relaxed. All of that started with one simple opener.
And what's happening psychologically in that moment?
A couple of things. First, by taking action, actually speaking, you prove to your brain that nothing terrible happens. That reduces future anxiety. Second, by focusing on their answers, you move out of self-consciousness and into curiosity. Third, you get a small win, a positive social interaction. That win starts to recalibrate your expectations, So next time, your brain predicts less awkwardness and more connection.
I like that idea of recalibrating, almost updating your internal software.
Exactly. You are updating your internal model of what happens when I talk to strangers.
Let's talk about another scenario, the awkward silence. You've used an icebreaker, the conversation is going okay, and suddenly there's a 3-second gap. Many people panic and run away. What should they do instead?
The first step is to remember that a few seconds of silence is completely normal. It feels longer when you're anxious, but to the other person, it's usually nothing. Practically, you can prepare 1 or 2 backup questions. For example, after a pause, you can say, "By the way, what do you enjoy most about your work?" Or, "I'm curious, what kind of projects are you working on this year?" Having these fallback questions ready means you don't need a perfect line. You just need one more step.
That word fallback is helpful. For our listeners, a fallback question is a safe question you can use if you don't know what to say next.
Exactly. Think of it as your professional safety net.
I also want to touch on business English specifically. You've already used some great phrases. Could you give us a few more key expressions people can use when they want to keep the conversation going without sounding pushy?
Sure. Here are a few useful ones. One is, tell me more about. For example, tell me more about how your team is using that tool. It sounds interested, but not aggressive. Another is, how do you usually approach? Like, how do you usually approach networking at events like this? That invites them to share their strategy or experience. And a third one is, what's your take on? You could say, what's your take on remote work these days? It's a very natural way to ask for someone's opinion in a professional context.
Those are great. And when you say, what's your take on, that's similar to what's your opinion about, but a bit more conversational, right?
Exactly. It's slightly more informal, but still professional. Perfect for networking.
Before we move to the vocabulary recap, I want to make sure we cover one more angle. Some listeners might worry, I don't want to sound like I'm using a script. How can they use these icebreakers without sounding robotic?
Good question. The goal is not to memorize every sentence word for word. Instead, learn the structure of each icebreaker and then adapt the wording to your style. For example, the structure of the first time here opener is reference the event plus ask about their reason for attending. So you could say, have you been to this meetup before? Or, what made you decide to come today? Same structure, different wording. Also, remember to match your tone to the situation. Smile, keep your voice relaxed, and speak a little slower than usual. That combination already makes you sound natural and confident.
Okay, let's do a quick vocabulary recap for our listeners before we close. Sarah, can you recap the key terms and phrases we've used today?
Sure. The first important term is icebreaker. That's a question or activity that helps start a conversation and break the ice between people who don't know each other. Then we talked about impression management, which means trying to control how other people see you. Remember, the goal is to move from impression management to genuine curiosity. We also use the phrasal verb drill down into, which means to look at something in detail, especially data or problems in meetings. Another key phrase is find common ground, which means discovering shared interests or opinions so you can connect more easily. And finally, we used expressions like, what brought you here? I'm curious about your perspective. Tell me more about, and what's your take on? These are all practical business English phrases you can use immediately at networking events or in professional conversations.
Great. So our listeners can take these phrases, combine them with the 5 icebreakers, and actually use them at their next event. Sarah, before we wrap up, what is the one thing you want people to remember about networking icebreakers?
The one thing is this. You don't need the perfect line. You just need a genuine reason to talk to someone. If you lead with curiosity, listen more than you speak, and use simple openers like, what brought you here? Or, what's your biggest interest in this field? You will be far more successful than someone trying to deliver a flawless pitch. And every time you start one of these conversations, you are training your brain to expect connection instead of rejection. That shift can change your career over time.
That's a powerful message. So, listeners, your challenge this week is simple. At your next networking event, use at least 2 of these icebreakers. Notice how people respond when you focus on curiosity instead of trying to impress. In our next episode, we're talking about your 30-second elevator pitch, a clear, confident mini introduction you can actually remember under pressure. If you've ever stumbled when someone asked, "So, what do?" you definitely don't want to miss it. Sarah, thanks so much for all the insights today.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And thanks to all of you for listening. Go start those conversations, and we'll see you in the next episode. Business Essentials Podcast. Unlock your career.
Learn to speak business English like a pro.